Welcome to this presentation of the Rotary Club of North Bethesda, Maryland, USA. Our club was established in 1974. We meet every Friday morning at 7:45 a.m., and we often invite guest speakers to give presentations on all kinds of interesting subjects. Please contact us through our website at nbrotary.org. And thanks for watching.
It's my honor today to introduce Dr. Paul Chen. Paul has a PhD and MS in atmospheric science, concentrating in climate. He conducted climate research and was the director of NASA Goddard Earth Science Data Center. He developed an approach for agricultural vulnerability assessment at USDA, and he was the chief information officer at the National Weather Service, where he developed a solution for flood hazard risk reduction. He has recently retired and unfortunately moved away from Wingate, but it is my honor to introduce Dr. Paul Chen. Please give him a warm welcome, Logan.
I still live in the neighborhood. Yeah, I live near the Whole Foods. Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak. I want to kind of point out to Paul. I think you're way ahead of me in using social media. Just a few days ago, on Tuesday of this current week, New York Times published an article that is based on NASA research. And the research uses satellite data to collect global floods and droughts, large-scale floods and droughts. And it shows that there has been a trend of increasing floods and droughts throughout the world. And particularly in the past few years, there has been a spike of this event. And you all feel that. And so what are the consequences of these floods and droughts? For example, droughts can cause wildfire. So we have all, in the past few years, kind of witnessed, from the news at least, rampant wildfires in the West. And for the past 30 years, these wildfires have been more frequent, larger, last longer, and it's harder to control. So I was a CIO for the Weather Service at that time in the 2005 timeframe. And before that, the fire season starts in August. So when I was in the Weather Service, the fire season starts in March. And now fire season is all year round. And so there's a lot of consequences. I'll just cite several. In 2017, there was a CNA report. CNA is a military think tank that analyzed armed conflicts in the Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia, and South Asia. And they cited one of the major causes of these conflicts is water shortage. And that people lose the agricultural productivity and they have to migrate northward and many into Europe. But we don't have to look very far into Middle East and North Africa for this climate migration. We have them within our borders. And 2005, after Katrina, several hundred thousands of people moved permanently to Houston. In 2017, Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico, and several hundred thousand people moved to Florida from Puerto Rico. And so just 2 years ago, 2 consecutive hurricanes hit 3 Central America countries, Honduras, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. And as a result of that, people had to trek all the way from their homes across Mexico to our southern border. So we see this in our home. in our backyard. So who and what contribute to these events? The simple answer, of course, is greenhouse gas, the warming of the atmosphere. But if you dig deeper into that, it kind of opens up the whole story. Just 2 years ago, the United Nations report on emission gap states that the per capita emission of the top 1% in the economic ladder, top 1% is about 80 times of the per capita emission of the lower 50%. So a small fraction of the people in the world is actually contributing to most of the carbon emission. So where does it come from? Where are these tons of carbon dioxide come from? It's from how we live, from our lifestyle, what we eat, how we travel around, how much we travel around, how much space we live in, and how much and what kind of material we consume. It's mostly from our lifestyle. So given that, what can be done about it? I mean, there's a myriad of things that you can do to look into your lifestyle and do a little soul searching on what can be done. So I want to just give this introduction, and I want to invite people to comment or question, and I would like to discuss with you. I want to leave more time to our interactions rather than just giving a pontification.
Okay.
So I have two questions that I always think about. One is, and I'm interested in you personally, your preference of flying over driving to save greenhouse gases. And the other thing is, do you think hydroponics and growing things inside is going to save us for the agriculture, not relying on soil?
I think so. The reason is that agriculture, of course, the carbon dioxide that in our breathing, there's no net output. The carbon dioxide that we breathe out, we exhale, basically comes from the carbohydrate we eat, right? So there's no net production, but agriculture itself is an energy-intensive business. So there's a lot of energy involved in transportation, in machinery, and also by planting, by growing vegetation in the soil, it really releases carbon dioxide from the soil itself. So there's a lot of carbon dioxide released in the agricultural process, not in the food itself, because the food, you eat the carbohydrate and you breathe out the carbon dioxide, there's a no net increase. So by growing your own food using hydroponics, it may help.
I had a question. California, I have some friends in California. They've gotten like 15 feet of snow in the past year. Is it 50? Okay. And that's just amazing amount of snow. And this was an area that had a drought. Is the drought over now in California, or is it just this up and down, what crazy swings?
I think it's the latter. There's up and down the crazy stuff, because the California drought has been lasting for more than 10 years. I mean, as far as I was watching the drought maps in California, it has been there. And so there is the Western Governor Association pays a lot of attention to droughts in the West, and they fund a project called NIDIS, the National Integrated Drought Information System, that the Weather Service is helping them to manage, basically studying the droughts in the West and giving warnings to them.
The drought, it's over in California, but it's still in Colorado area.
Yeah. It's in the Southwest.
Yeah.
Before I get to you, is that it has been proven. Well, I cannot say proven because you can consider circumstantial. Demonstrated in modeling, in simulations, that a warmer climate actually gets a lot more variability in the climate system. So there would be a lot more weather hazards. But overall, it's still warming because United States and Canada combined is only 3.8% of the world's area. So you think what is happening in your backyard or what's happening in the United States is the world. It's not. It's only, even together with Canada, it's only 3.8% of the area. So a lot of things, a lot of disasters are happening around the world that we are not aware of. And that's why the first study I cited using satellite is so important, because it takes the picture of the entire globe.
Aren't we, I have a few comments. I'm more of a skeptical person, but aren't we, you just emphasize the fact that California, the United States and Canada are only like 3% of the world. And that makes sense when you need the satellite. But are we also ignoring the fact that the time frame we're talking about is a fraction of a second compared to the entire time of the Earth, for one thing? And just if we to talk about the modern period, it's still a very small portion that we don't have records to compare to. So that's my first comment. The other comment, as far as California is concerned, as far as the drought is concerned, we've been in a drought for a while, and I agree. I grew up in California, and we were all right until I left around 1977. We were the start of a drought then, but California is a desert. When they first thought California, right. Most of the central and southern California is a desert. And the only reason we talk about drought because so many people are living there now, and we utilize irrigation. The farmland is so fertile that we use it to produce all our food, and so we're naturally more sensitive to changes in precipitation because we're so dependent on it. Whereas before we moved there, people, that is. It was what it was, a desert.
Yeah, thank you. But I just want to make the remark that at my age, I have learned to take one question at a time because I don't remember the second. But I do remember. But the second question, the climate simulation have shown that in general, not in there are exceptions and many exceptions, but in general, the drier places will get drier and the wet places will get wetter. So the eastern half of the United States will get wetter and the western half of the United States will get drier. And so the drought in California will exacerbate. That's one question that I want to get back to an earlier one. I remember the time frame. So the question is related to, is this climate change, which happening in the past 100 years and in the future 100 years, is it part of the natural cycle, which can last a long time in the Earth's history, right? That's related.
We don't really have the history.
Well, we do. We have record.
We infer from trees and
from ice cores. A kilometer-long ice core has been dug up from the Antarctic to analyze the temperature of these past several million years. So at least a solid record of the 650 years, 650,000 years is analyzed. And so we know that for the past several million years, we have ice ages that last 135,000 years each. The cooling time is about 110,000 years, and the warming time is about 25,000 years. So it goes from this way, I think. It cooled down for 110,000 years and then warms it back up for about 25,000 years. So, and the range, global range is 5 degrees centigrade each time. So growing cooling 5 degree and then warming 5 degree centigrade. The current rate of warming is much, much faster than that. It's about 50 times, the current warming rate is about 50 times the warming rate of the Ice Age. So that is one circumstantial evidence that the current warming is not part of natural cycle.
I don't want to, if anybody else has a question. I want to ask you about hurricane predictions.
Yeah.
So when we see the hurricane coming up the coast, and everyone talks about the path, and they always talk about, what this model shows this. Is the European model, is the European model actually much better than the Americans have done?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is. They use just go into a little scientific mumbo jumbo. They use a very different method than the United States, but the United States is changing now. There's the US used to stopped at about a couple of years. It has stopped a couple of years. Use a method called spectral decomposition of the Earth. So, and now it has changed to a finite element method. You probably know that. The numerical method changed from a spectral decomposition to finite element, and so finite volume. And it is expected to improve.
Okay.
And so I think Congress is really irritated about the European doing better than us. So they dumped about $100 billion to the Weather Service to improve its act.
Well, it makes a big difference with the just a few miles.
Yeah. But I noticed that many TV stations still reference the European models. That would give the Weather Service more funding.
On the subject of hurricane prediction, recently I've seen some maps showing that hurricanes in the future are predicted to come further inland on the East Coast than previously, and that shows that they will come over Washington, D.C., which is not on the Atlantic coast, whereas before they were, on the North Carolina coast, barrier islands, and up from Florida. What do you see as the implication for flood insurance policies and for building on or near the coast? I mean, Lhasa and I both have houses on the tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay, which are becoming clearly more vulnerable.
Yeah, so.
My town, St. Michael's, has just published a flood mitigation proposal that they want community input on, and they have a map showing what a 4-foot storm surge would do to St. Michael's and nearby communities, and basically many of them will be underwater. Yes,
I have a really good story to tell here.
So,
I spent many years in the past dozen years on flood risk disaster mitigation, reduce flood risk. And so I did a simulation on what would happen in a large storm in the Chesapeake Bay.
yeah.
And so the large storm so far in the United States is Sandy,
Right.
2012. But they don't, large storms, we rarely see large storms come close to Washington, D.C. But what if they do? The track that come through Washington, D.C. was Isabel's,
Yes.
2003. I still remember things, fortunately.
We lost power for a week.
And so what I test a number of tracks, maybe 24 tracks, on putting a big storm on how it caused storm surge in the Chesapeake Bay. And so finally, the biggest storm surge was the putting Sandy storm on top of the Isabel trap. So numerically, I can do that. Just doing a numerical experiment. I put the Sandy storm, the wind on top of the Isabel trap. But it didn't affect Isabel, it didn't affect the rest of the Chesapeake that much. But it affected Georgetown and Harvey the Great. Harvey Grace.
At the top of the
Top of the Chesapeake Bay.
Is that because the water's all
Right, because the wind is the storm surge is a wind effect. It's driven by wind, and so it's like a funnel.
Yeah.
Chesapeake Bay is like a funnel. When water push up the funnel, the top of the funnel,
Nowhere to go.
nowhere to go. And so Georgetown was 15 feet.
Oh,
Yeah, and Harvey Grace about the same.
And 50 feet.
15.
Underwater.
And the flood in Ellicott City was due to rain, not seawater. But this is storm surge which comes from the ocean. So it is an interesting story, and I like to interest Washington D.C., the environmental department, and Mawata on that, and they got very interested in hearing me, but not paying me to do any study.
well, they do have flood walls. Sure.
Oh yes, yeah, and
There are
that's
some.
one on the 17th Street. Yeah,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Protect against it.
Yeah, I don't know how tall they are, but
Yeah, that one is you don't see it when you go downtown.
it's by the Washington Monument.
Right, and because when flood comes, they would put the gate up. They just use the crane and put the gates up. But when if you go downtown, they don't have the gates there now.
Is
So
anybody communicating this to the counties in like in Queen Anne's County and Chesapeake
I tried
to not allow the houses to be built right
Yeah.
on the water?
I tried. A number of people also tried, but say, well, yeah, we know.
But it's interesting in Queen Anne's, I'm at the board of a marina, Kent Island. And we not so worry about when the storm comes in the bay.
Mhm.
We're more afraid when the water goes out of the bay.
Mhm.
So because of the islands, we get all the water pushed up, as you say. Very interesting what you've done there. But when the water comes out again, then the water raises dramatically on Kent Island.
It depends on the topography and the geography, because the water can be on one side of the island, can add water on one side of the island, and lower water on the other side.
Yeah.
So you really need the simulation, a numerical simulation to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we have a strategy in Kent Island, we send it down to St. Michael and get the water. We have a canal going down there, so we send all the water.
But have you seen any communities yet that say no more building 500 feet from the coast or 1,000 feet from the coast or on this particular floodplain area, no more building, no flood insurance? I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, I don't think so. But as soon as the insurance company does something, I think they will react.
In Florida, the insurance.
That's right.
Yeah,
They don't give
yeah.
insurance, so it's quite expensive.
Okay, so this is not exactly question, it's more suggestion. Thank you very much. Mention lifestyle, even it's tiny percent. That's very interesting. First time I heard that. I'm in a residential, it's my professional. And now I understood if you're heating whole year, 40,000 square foot house or 800 apartment, it's a different. And this number for square footage is grow up because houses sell by square footages, and it's more and more. And sometimes I saw bedroom like this size, and I said, "What you're doing, people? Bed is the same size."
Yeah.
You said, but it's happened.
Yeah.
And thank you for mentioning this. We will think that's just one tiny idea to stop this, grow up like.
Yeah, I want to give you a little more idea. I practice what I preach, but I don't think about climate change anymore when I do things. It just become my lifestyle. So I live in a condo, 1,500 square foot, not a big house. And I never use, I don't know how to use my dishwasher. And I've never used my dryer. Well, except when it rains. I use it only when it rains. So I leave it, I keep the temperature now, I keep it at 65 degrees in winter and 78 degrees in summer.
So you're eating paper plates?
I never use, I don't use paper products. And I put on my sweater and maybe sometimes jacket in the house in winter.
So you will meet a lot of enemies.
Yeah.
People do.
Oh, wait, go ahead.
So on the lifestyle question, is it okay if I?
The lifestyle. Yeah.
Since we're on the lifestyle, so I want an electric car.
Mhm.
I want an electric car, and I want it for a number of different reasons. I wish I would say primarily because environmental, but primarily because it's faster than all the other cars out there, right? Which is kind of alluring to me.
I'm more in trend too.
Yes, yeah, more interesting. But one of the things I've run into are a couple of buddies who are sort of skeptical about climate have said that they think it's worse for the environment, and I've had a hard time arguing. They say something about batteries and getting rid of batteries. One. The second thing they say is that the energy has to come from somewhere, so it comes from dirty energy. And I read that the electrical cars are much more efficient. So, like when you look at the carbon output versus burning gas, and even getting the electric from the electric grid, it's much more efficient. But I haven't been able to come up with a pretty good argument. So, can you help me, please?
Yeah. Has been reports on that subject, and over the whole entire life cycle, including considering that electric cars still use energy generated by fossil fuel, the carbon footprint of an electric or all electric is about half of that of a gasoline car. And I live in a condo. We don't have chargers in a condo, an old condo. But I use the next best. I drive a Prius hybrid, and I routinely get 60 miles per hour on highway per gallon. Sorry. Per gallon on highways, that's more than double a conventional car of the same size. So I think energy efficiency and conservation are the cheapest thing to do right now. I mean, just imagine to build out solar panels and windmills for the entire population. It would take massive amount of land. But why not do something cheap now? Efficiency and conservation. And we would solve the problem, at least 30% of the problem within a few years.
Haven't we been doing? I mean, I think the use of energy in this country has actually become more efficient over the last 40 years. I mean, just looking at the cars themselves, I mean, they get much better gas mileage. Right. So, I mean, in that sense, we have improved it, and everybody who would disagree with conservation.
But here, in Washington, D.C. and in Montgomery County, I see maybe 1 hour for every 10 car is a hybrid or even more. I recently went to Florida and I don't see any on the street.
Okay, close in Florida.
So you think it's
Yes.
Question on the other end. When I was at the Spy Museum a few months ago with my grandkids, they had that the planes went up and seeded the clouds to make it rain around so visibility again. And I know Israel is learning to make rain. Is this real that we can make it rain more in those?
Yeah, I don't know for fact. Has been done for decades. Seeding silver iodide on a cloud, and I don't know whether it really works or not. But it has been done from various countries over decades.
Thank you for an interesting discussion of climate change. I think we all appreciate it, and it's you can remain afterward. People may have other questions.
Yeah,
I appreciate the meeting. It was very informative, and I'm glad that that we're open to discussion about it, as opposed to not being allowed to have an open mind. That's right. Thank you very much for coming. We'll see you all next week. Next week we are still meeting here